So welcome. Thank you so much for being here. So this is our fourth meetup that we got going over the past few months. We started out with doing marketing lessons from the presidential elections in the US, and that was really wonderful. I, for one, enjoyed it. I'm a little biased, but I think it was really well received. Then we went to alignment between finance and marketing, a group that totally needs to be aligned if you want a budget, and especially in a small or large company. So that was really good. And then we had a session on marketing metrics just about a month ago. So this time we're going to handle the funnel and figure out whether it's still useful or obsolete or whatnot. And now I'm going to ask my wonderful co-hosts and panelists to introduce themselves. James, maybe you want to go first.
Yeah, thank you very much. So James Hankins, founder at Vizer Consulting, and I suppose one of the reasons why I'm here today is because I came up with the Hankins hexagon, which is a new model of the path to purchase.
Indeed. Sam, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Sam Brealey, and I'm a freelance marketer, a bit of an all-rounder, really. So if it's a marketing task, I'll always just kind of throw myself in as long as the client can pay me money. And yeah, I mean, I work mostly with small businesses. So again, I'm quite a hands-on marketer. So my opinions on things like funnels and academic stuff might be surprising to some, but at the same time, I think everything has value.
Excellent. Doug?
Yeah, and I'm Doug Garnett. I owned an ad agency for 20 years, shut it down a few years ago, and I now teach at Portland State University, do some consulting, and I'm writing a book on the issues around complexity in general business, especially kind of where can you find competitive advantage by understanding these strange ways the world might work. So, and I just have to ask Sam a question. Is that a steering wheel or a light?
Wait, what, this here?
Yeah.
This is my microphone. It's because if I don't use something, it will just sound awful, and I'd rather have good sound. So. Well, the other day I was on a podcast, and I realized the whole time I was sitting there like this, and I was like, I must look like Darth Vader or something. So I'm trying to keep it over. I could just hold on. Just look like
Oh, it makes a huge difference. So I'll go next, and then I'll tee it up, and then we can get started. So I and a group of friends run an agency called Orion X. If you go to orionx.net, you will see what we're doing. A portion of my job is to be an industry analyst, tracking mega trends like IoT and 5G and quantum computing and cryptocurrencies. And I actually work with several companies that employ us for that reason. I also grew up in marketing, so I track these things and I'm highly interested, and I think engagement in general is a really big deal. And then some of my colleagues also run a demand generation customer engagement practice that complements what we do. So I want to take that now to the whole sales funnel. If you guys are on Twitter at all and you follow James or Sam or Doug, you know that the conversation is always very lively. They are not shy people. They have strong opinions, almost always really well-founded. Even if you disagree with them, you can see their point, which I think is why all of us are here, and I have the pleasure of talking to them. I personally like to look at the historical view of things because I learn why we are where we are and why, what parameters we're trying to optimize. But I was having a pre-call with my colleague Cindy, who's also on the call yesterday, and she was just telling me I have no interest in history. So okay, maybe I won't go there. But fundamentally, a funnel is used to track a deal. So the question is, why is funnel a thing? Why is it a thing to begin with? Why is it used at all? Well, it is used because it tracks deal flow. It looks like a martini glass, but everybody wants it to look like a beer mug. I think that's, in fact, an objective of marketing, is to turn it into a beer mug. It really is just a snapshot of deal flow according to likelihood to buy. Traditionally, it was just kind of the historical AIDA. It's been around for more than 100 years. Awareness, interest, desire, action. AIDA is still, but they get to define it any way you want. Why is it useful? Because you can measure sales progress. You can find out where you need a marketing help. You can decide what the marketing mix should be. It may tell you how to interact with each customer if you've got that right. It's also important for the sales marketing alignment because it puts everybody on the same page. But has it become more complex? Has it changed? Are things like ABM changing it? AI? What is really going on with nurturing and all that? So let me start with a question and see what you guys think. Is the funnel obsolete, or is AIDA still it? So who wants to go first? Sam, you go.
I'll go first. No, it's not obsolete. And this is where my controversial opinions come in, which is, for me, it depends on who you're talking to, So for small businesses, most of them know what a sales funnel is. Most of them know what a marketing funnel is. So for me, I use it more as a presentation tool rather than the nuts and bolts of how I actually do stuff. So I won't be talking to small business clients about category entry points or Hankins hexagon, because it's too complex for a lot of people. And not to discredit their intelligence, but a lot of people aren't interested in the details. So I still think those old models are super useful in terms of actually trying to visualize something that can be quite complex and show it in a way that a lot of people just get it, that it is a funnel and you stick customers in the top and you got to make people aware of you, and then they'll consider you, and then they'll buy you, and everyone kind of understands that. And obviously the details of that as practitioners is something you can debate, but yeah, I still think it's a super useful thing.
I fully agree with that. I think that partly because I come out of sales originally. When I first got into marketing, I was in the sales organization with Shaheen, and the truth in sales is the funnel makes tremendous sense also in organizing your time, because the traditional sales process of finding leads, qualifying leads, focusing on the qualified ones, and arranging your time according to how much you think you'll be able to get out of a group of leads through the funnel is really practical in sales. I think where it's tricky is, I think sometimes as a result of that, it's been imposed on marketing, where the salespeople, kind of throw their rebellion, which is marketing's all screwed up, which sales always says that about marketing, and marketing always says that about sales. But they kind of it's all screwed up, and so you need to be doing it this way. On the other hand, we got to have something for figuring out how people are getting an understanding of how people move from not knowing anything to purchase, and
Making notes. Making notes. Yeah, I mean, it's because two things have been mentioned here, two concepts anyway. There's the sales funnel, and then there's the marketing funnel, and in my mind, they've got two different uses. The sales funnel is almost, or can be, kind of discrete in that you've got one-to-one. So when you're a salesman, you have a relationship with the leads, and they are people that you speak to on a regular basis, and you are able to convert them, to verify them, to then push them through using maybe your Sandblast sales system, for example. However, I suppose, Doug, as you say, it's kind of been wedged onto marketing, and it's a metaphor in marketing, because it's not one-to-one. We have a bucket of people that are here. They are aware of our business. You can't convert them. Conversion, that's an issue, and that's where a lot of people fall down. And actually, I blame Millward Brown. Because they say, oh, well, you convert X percent of awareness into Y percent of consideration, which means that you'll get Z purchase intent, and you're going, right, hang on a bit, these aren't real people, these are just numbers, these are concepts, these are metaphors. It's not the same as a sales funnel, although they look the same. I mean, that said, I think that as a metaphor, the funnel is useful. However, I hate the word conversion. It just drives me nuts. Because they're different people as well, different moments in time. The same, you might have an awareness figure this year versus next year. They will be completely different people. Like they won't be the same people, but because they're in that bucket, unfortunately, and this is using a tool, it might be useful, but in the using of it, people fall down because they make that assumption that they're the same people and they aren't. So there, I suppose it's caveats when using it, big caveats, like everything we do.
So I'm going to comment on this. To me, the funnel is a snapshot of your deal flow according to the likelihood to buy. And because likelihood to buy is easy to sort linearly and say 0%, 10%, 20%, that forces a linearization of the funnel that is really wasn't intended. So I don't think it ever meant to be a replica of the customer journey. I think it simply was a way to keep track of sales progress. When the sales manager goes to the sales rep and say, how much are you going to sell this quarter? He says, well, I got this guy. Well, how likely is he to buy? Well, and how like, they did this, they were doing a proof of concept. They look like they're doing it. And that was a way of summing it up. And as a sales manager, you kind of over time would know how to read people's likelihoods. If this guy says 10%, he really means 50. If the other guy says 90, he really means also 50, just because the way they look at life. But I don't think it ever meant to linearize a process and therefore, sort of say conversion as in, you can never go back. So I feel like the customer journey was always there. And the fact that we can now represent it analytically is a tool that we didn't have before.
I think part of the linear challenge, let's to get really specific, is I think we forget about how much it's like a single individual can accelerate. Like in the sales funnel, they can go from being a lead to being agreed, we just need the contract signed in a very short time sometimes. And other times they take months and months and months to get from that one place to another. So yeah, even if you track a single individual, this is where I begin to separate is some of the ways that customer journey has been used. Do you mind if I show one of the things I don't like in customer journey here? Which is, here's an illustration of customer journey. And what you like this? Yes. What
I love it.
Is it takes every department in the company and then maps it against these incredibly detailed kinds of breakdown of customer journey. With what James was saying, yeah, this is it's a great analogy, a metaphor, map for what we're doing to think about customers having to go from, gosh, I don't know anything about your product to, yes, please install this computer in my company, or something like that. It is an incredible kind of a journey. But when we take it and organize it to this degree, I begin to turn sick to the stomach because it loses that power of being able to say, the questions I ask of things like this is, where's our challenge? Is our biggest challenge that we don't have enough people who are aware? Or is our biggest challenge that we get people down here where they're almost ready to acquire it, and yet they don't make that final move? If that's a challenge, then you got, each of those has different things you might try to do as a marketer. So I look at it as a way to understand kind of what the challenges might be. Okay, you can have your screens back.
Now that's a great example, Doug. This is one of the things I always come up against, which really, really, really frustrates me, is people who bamboozle with that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So they give you all this data and they give you all this information. You look at it and go, that's just noise, okay? Because you've presented me all this stuff, but none of it has any meaning at all. And it's this illusion of control over how customers behave. And I think that's the difference between knowing what you're doing in marketing and having an understanding of marketing. So there's plenty of people that know what a funnel is, or they understand about a customer journey, but they don't really recognize that in practice, it is a metaphor. It's like a visual concept. It's not like, let's plot the customer journey, guys. We're gonna plot the customer journey, and it's that simple. If we just do a couple of spreadsheets and a couple of graphics, bam, we can double our conversion rates. And in a lot of cases, we know that the conversion rates in certain categories are kind of uniform. They don't really vary much. And you get these people saying, oh, well, can we double our conversions? You go, well, no, because your conversions are kind of average for the category and you're never going to change that. So actually go further up the funnel, just reach more people. You're not spending enough on advertising. your sales are flatlined and you've been reaching the same amount of people for 3 years. Why aren't you trying to reach more people? And they go, yeah, but what if we just did a couple more Google ads to try and, you know, improve our optimization and get more conversions. And I just go, come on, it's simpler than that. We don't need to be, you know, silly. And you can run really simple surveys just to find out little nuggets of information. Like there was one I did recently, which was like 53% of consumers weren't aware of the product in a certain geography. And I said, well, if half of the people don't know your product exists, how can you say you want to increase conversion? This is where we end up in that Byron Sharp discussion of, you know, heavy buyers and light buyers. You know, those things don't change. And if you understand that, you understand the rules of things and how things work, then you can actually apply them. But when you try to create like a story, that's where I think the whole thing just kind of collapses in on itself.
Yeah, unified or kind of.
So Doug, you mentioned this. I'm sorry, you mentioned this in our email exchange. That do you even know what your sales cycle looks like? How do you know that you actually have got it right? How do you know that's the customer journey? And in fact, I work with a bunch of startups, and I have come to believe that the litmus test of whether a startup succeed or doesn't succeed is whether they have a sales process that works more often than not. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have a sales process like that, everything that they do in sales and marketing at best is going to give them that. The objective of hiring salespeople and marketing people is to arrive at a sales process that works more often than not. Now, once you have that, then you can do these analyses. But
you still have, you have to figure that out some way. And I think there's a couple things. One is building a little bit off what Sam was saying. There's an attitude that companies need to avoid, which is the attitude of we can't convert these people to buy, because people convert on their own. That's a choice. It's and you can help, you can assist, you can urge, you can encourage. The model I use, I don't use the AI, whatever, but I use one that has in the final stage is predisposition, because you get people decided they're going to buy, but don't buy. And what do you do there? Advertise a deal. That's what all the car manufacturers do in the US. And so there are things you can do to help, but you're not, you can't get them to convert. Some sales happen on a specific timeline, and you as the company cannot advance that faster. You can't, maybe you can help it, maybe you can goose it along, but not much control. So I think some of it is accepting that as a company, you're not in control. You're trying to work with consumers or customers and figure out how to get them to come to love your product and come to decide it's what they need and then come to buy it. I think the other thing is you've got to listen both informally and formally to the market. So I advise my students, they say, well, how do you start this? I'm like, every conversation you have, you listen for things, indicators of where people are at, what is going on with them. In the listening I've done, and we have, in the formal side, I've done a lot of market research through a kind of a focus group method where we, if you will, this is too crass, it's not really it, but if you will, we kind of test a sales pitch. So we take the process of you don't know anything, and we test foundational statements, which aren't about our product at all, but are testing and trying to understand whether people have a unified assumptions to begin with. If they don't understand what a chip is, you can't sell chips to them. So you could run around, and this is one of the marketing areas you see is people running around saying, I've got the best inverse backwards gallium arsenide Fizzbit chip. And people are like, what's gallium arsenide? I don't even know why I care. And so you just slip out of their mind. So we start with foundation, and then we go through a whole set of ideas and watch. And coming out of that research, we've had real good luck of being able to say, yeah, everybody knows about this product, but they're getting hung up here, or, there's you can start feeling those. You can't come away with absolutes, but I'm not sure that this is an area where absolutes can't even be fully measured or quantified or dictated. It's more to learn,
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a couple of things there around conversion and predisposition, and a lot of this is about risk management and guarantees. And no one wants to tell their boss that, this might work. It's likely that this will work,
right.
But the probabilities are 0.6, which means there's 40% chance that it won't work. No one wants that. No one wants that. And I suppose this is where this conversion kind of narrative comes from. Is you can almost go, no one got fired for hiring IBM. Look what the data says. The data says this, and therefore if I do it, well, then it's not my fault because the data's told me to do it.
Right.
And you know what? It's Millward Brown who said that. I got nothing on Millward Brown, actually. In fact, they helped. There's a brilliant example, and I think, Doug, you mentioned using funnels or using research in a way to derive problems, what the problem is. And I was very, very fortunate to work on IKEA in the UK when we were struggling back in 2013. The business was doing well, but the brand wasn't. And what we'd identified was this relationship between awareness and consideration, which kind of makes sense when you talk it through, which is that awareness and consideration were about the same levels. They were kind of aggregating together. And when you think about IKEA, if you're aware of it, you considered it. Well, that was because it was a life stage, and it was becoming a Marmite brand. Because once you're out of the life stage and you stop buying IKEA, you don't tend to go back. That was the situation that we'd got to. We weren't bringing in an older generation, for example. We were just bringing the starters who were building their house. And we said, well, this is a major problem. Like, if you are not, if you are becoming a Marmite brand, how do you break out of that? How do you begin to appeal to more people? Because arguably, people were ignoring our advertising, because if you considered IKEA, it was kind of going the wrong way. If you considered them, you were aware of them. The Baader-Meinhof principle, i.e., you see something, you see it everywhere. And so we developed a platform which was opening up kind of IKEA, the wonderful everyday, the magic of the everyday, appealing to more people, basing it on design. Kind of going, you know what, you've ignored IKEA and you think you've moved away, but it's really clever design and it fits everyone's kind of house. Whether you're you've got kids or not, whether you've got money or not, it's democratic design, and that's where that came from. The insight started at a funnel and understanding that kind of Marmitization of the brand, and it took us 18 months and a lot of additional analysis to build out. But that's where we started. We actually used the metaphor and layered another one on, the Marmite, to help bring the client along. So again, it's the value is in helping take you somewhere rather than, I suppose, reporting. And that's what you're getting. It's an insight tool.
It is a
it's
diagnosis
not a reporting
tool, right?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
in
think.
a lot of ways. I'm curious, Sam. I was going to ask you because I think your smaller marketer experience I was wondering how much of that's because they're so close to sales in those companies, right? I mean, the bigger you get, the easier it is to have a marketing department, a sales department.
Yeah.
But the smaller you are, it's like we need that sale, So I don't know if how much influence is there on that, because I think this is absolutely. I think it really is this way to think that I think is most to analyze, to problem solve, and the like. But I don't know what you see in your smaller client customers.
I mean, to be honest, it's largely the same as bigger ones. I mean, it's not hugely different. Obviously, the reality of it is cash flow. So money always has to be coming in. You can't say, oh, we've got to spend 6% of our budget on brand. You can't say those things as much as you'd like to, Right. And this is the reality of it, isn't it? Which is that with smaller business, as James said, that it's more about risk management. And it's kind of really, you're just trying to use any tool you can within the context of the situation to say, don't do that. Let's steer away from that. And as long as we're kind of going down this path, it's absolutely fine. And as well, when James said about reporting, that this is where the problem is. And this is a big problem in small businesses, which is they have those conversion rates and they focus on those. They obsess over them because of a lack of knowledge. Not many marketers are trained, so on and so forth. But this is another discussion. But what happens is you end up with these people obsessing over these tiny little figures, and that becomes their motivation, which then leads to perverse incentives. So that's when you get the odd, discount. Let's just slide in discounts. Let's put in discounts whenever sales aren't looking good. Let's put some discounts in. But the problem is they don't look at the simple stuff like, well, how many of your sales are based on seasonality? Are you factoring that into your sales? Are you looking at baselines? Are you looking at incrementality? Relatively simple concepts actually, but it's just stuff that people don't do because they think data equals digital in a lot of cases. So funnels in smaller businesses often end up just being digital marketing funnels, but then those businesses that do broaden out, it ends up being, it doesn't matter really if it's B2b or B2c. It's kind of, because it's a smaller business, you can kind of stick it all in one funnel. Like for a small business, they don't really need to have like a B2b funnel and a different funnel, because if they did, it'd be like, well, you've got like 2 staff, you've got like 1 marketing guy and a business development lady, so they're going to be working together anyway. Their roles will cross over. So it's in a lot of ways, it's a lot simpler to kind of create a picture as to what's happening, but at the same time, harder to diagnose the actual problems and to actually solve them.
Sorry,
So
we've had
pardon me, you guys.
Say that,
go ahead, please.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think Andrew's asked a question on what I meant by Marmite. So you either love Marmite or you hate it. There is no in between. And what we saw with IKEA was that you either
it's food. It's a food.
It's food.
It's a food, yeah.
Well, or theoretically, it's a food substance.
It's a food substance. I don't know what is it. It's a
yeast
spread.
Yeah,
yeast.
it's a yeast extract. Yeah.
Is it related to Vegemite?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly, but stronger and more flavoursome and delicious. So it's quite an acquired taste. And the way we applied it in the UK to IKEA was that if you were aware of, or if you considered the brand, you were aware of everything. You were aware of the advertising, you were aware of it. As soon as you stepped out of considering IKEA, because maybe you'd gone their cheap, nasty stuff that falls apart, or I have to make it myself, that was it. You ignored the brand. You'd gone. You'd moved on, and maybe you shopped in John Lewis or whatever. And there was no way that we could, we needed to break that. We needed to break that fixation. That's what I meant by Marmite. You were either IKEA or you weren't. And so there was a risk that we would end up just talking to IKEAites and no one else. And yes, they weren't the same people, but broadly speaking, you were talking to a moment in time. We had to enhance that and bring it broader, and that's where focusing on the design credentials and the clever design and the magic behind the design broadened IKEA from where they were. I mean, we're talking 2013, so it is a while ago, and it is the global platform now, but that's what we meant by Marmite. It was no longer you were either or. Some people, yeah, it's more flexible now anyway.
More flexible.
Can I jump in with one thought real quick, Shaheen? I know you got a question, but as we go, the map that I use separates awareness and understanding, essentially with the idea, which is understanding is that someone understands, let's call it the positioning or the fundamental claims of a product. What does the product really claim? Because the thing I don't like, I tell my students very often, if they ever answer a question as what's needed is awareness, they get 0 points, because awareness is, I mean, I remember in the .com area when they were shooting gerbils at targets or something like that. And, and all they were hoping for is that somebody would remember their name. And that doesn't do anything for them, because there is a need for some sort of grokking of why should I care before people reject. And I don't know. I just, as you're talking, James, I'm thinking about that a bit with IKEA, that they got a real shallow understanding. What you're talking about is almost like a real shallow understanding, which leads to a real quick rejection or acceptance. But a deeper understanding, would give a little more, enriches the brand and leads more people to it and the like.
But that sounds truly a brand problem that clearly they've taken steps to solve.
Yes.
You guys mentioned B2b, B2c, and then small company, large company. And there are, in fact, a couple of differences between B2b and B2c. I would say that the biggest one is that B2b often is a committee buy. It's not an individual or even one department. So therefore, it's extremely kind of multi-funnel. Each different player is at a different stage in the funnel. Like, the IT department is signed up, but finance department hasn't. and the CMO department hasn't, and they all have to agree before it happens. Right? So that's one thing that is different. And then the second thing that's different is that in B2B, sometimes it's a design win. It's not a product win. It's not like you buy a product and you employ it. You decide that that's the product you're going to design into your other product, and that may be 2 years out. So good news is that you want it. Bad news is that you're not going to really get anything for it for another 2 years until they ship. So those really put different twists on the notion of the funnel or multi-funnel and how you're going to manage it. And I think the graph that you showed, Doug, with all that complexity was an example of a committee buy. And there's nothing wrong with that, as you mentioned. And it's really good to have that awareness. And if it is going to point out where exactly you might have a problem as a diagnostics tool, and then what marketing mix you bring to bear to solve it, well, then great. There's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, that's kind of, I suppose, where the hexagon came from, was that that sense of probabilities and likelihood of moving through and changing kind of pathways. And what you can do with the hexagon as well is, because the links between the kind of nodes are probabilities, you can layer on channels over the top, and this is where it does get complicated, that can potentially enhance the probability that you'll then move through to another stage.
So James, you should describe your hexagon.
Actually, I'll share it. I'll share it here,
and you can share it, yeah. And in fact, you could also talk about the pinball rendition of it, which I think is brilliant.
So yes, this is the Hankins hexagon, and so it wasn't who actually. I think it might have been Marketing Week who led with the Hankins hexagon, and by then it's stuck. I don't mind, but essentially it is the hexagon with each and every node, which are kind of standardized moments of inflection, decision moments, as it were, and they're broadly standardized. You have a out of market, a passive assimilation stage. You have a trigger moment that a need, most of the time, not always. Active evaluation is long listing, comparison is short listing, purchase obviously, and then post purchase. And the idea here is that you can actually align potentially funnel metrics against these, and that pathways to purchase are unformed, undecided, and the theory is that the pathways will fit a normal distribution curve, so that most of them will follow a standardized similar pathway. I'm sure one of your previous guests, Andrew Wilshire, will bring up the example of the standardized pathway leading to only 1% of journeys, but that's the concept. That's the theory, is that you can go, for example, you pop into, you're not in market, you're going down the high street, you decide to pop into a shop and buy a chocolate bar, and it's the first chocolate bar you spot. So actually you're out of market. What's the trigger? It might be hungry, straight through to purchase because you pick the first one off the shelf, and then obviously you eat it into the post-purchase cycle, etc., etc. There was no long listing or short listing, or no, at least nothing that lasted longer than a kind of infinitely small period of time in your head, where you made that choice. But those aren't manageable at that stage. You could improve the probability that someone chooses you by having a wobbler in the estate agent over the top of the chocolate bars that called you out. Would that increase the probability? Well, maybe. And that's how you begin using this tool to optimize and improve certain probabilities.
Can Can I
But
jump?
yeah.
I laughed just because that was very funny terminology that those of us in the US are like a wobbler at the estate agents. Oh, anyway, calling out the chocolate bar. I'm working on it. I think I know what you mean. You know what's interesting to me, Andrew, as we talk about it here, is that a given individual's process might actually need 3 or 4 different triggers. That a first trigger says, hey, you ought to look at this, and therefore they move into some active evaluation, but at some point that ebbs and they move back to a passive assimilation point, and then something else happens that triggers them into, okay, let's get really serious, let's go compare. And then, you know, they do that and don't necessarily move. And I think that that's kind of a human reality. Even in B2B, where I've watched companies say, well, let's go look at this thing. And then you look at it and you go, well, we can't quite decide. And it kind of gets tabled for a while. And then the company will come back to it. Sorry, Shane, what were you going to say?
Well, what I was going to say is also the meaning of a purchase, because you know, when you do the chocolate bar, it's a very transactional purchase at one end of the spectrum, which is not so risky. How wrong can you get? Something sweet and you're done. And then at the way other end of the spectrum, you're making a decision for the next 3 decades. And you know, and it becomes a highly engaged, deep commitment to a technology or to a product or to a vendor. And then suddenly it becomes a lot more weighty. So the way I define it is that at one end of the spectrum, it's transactional, at the other end is intellectual. And if you really are in an intellectual purchase situation, then thought leadership and branding and long-term, you know, all of those stuff become way more important. And I think the sales cycle necessarily becomes longer. There's also a correlation with price. You know, long-term decisions usually aren't low price. If it is, then you can, you know, again, there's not enough risk.
Exactly that.
Over time, Andrew, would you say, is it fair to kind of look at this and think, all right, if I think like the graph I did about a single individual over time, that a single individual over time, if at any point in time you could say, where is this person in the Hankins hexagon for handicapping? No, that's right. That people spend most of their time in passive assimilation.
Yeah,
that,
absolutely.
You know, in terms of time, actual, you know, clock time, right? Even in a business, the amount of time we're actually working on the purchase. So I worked on General Dynamics' first Cray purchase, and it was maybe a quarter of my job for 2 or 3 months, but it was only quarter. You know, I still had a lot of time when I was doing other things.
Right. So Sam, I want to bring you in. What is your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I've in a way I've used this, not directly used this tool, James's tool, much to my shame. I need to, but yeah, I mean, for me, it goes back to that sharp thing of category entry points, which of course sounds really jargony and academic, but it's just the reality of it, which is finding those moments in a person's, you know, buying journey as to when you can influence them, basically. So in the past, what I've done is create, you know, a pretty standard diagnostic funnel where I've broken down those awareness, consideration, blah, 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 and just looked to see if there's any gaping holes in it. So, you know, are there any huge problems? And if there hasn't been any massive ones, I've gone, right, okay, so what can we do here? And then basically break down those CEPs and apply them to the different stages of the funnel. And I always try to add that caveat in, as James said, the caveat is that it is a metaphor. It is not like you start here and then you move here and then you move here. That's not how it works. And but yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to I think this is the crux of it, isn't it? Which is that people phase in and out of stuff. And sometimes you get people that are really, really involved in a product and a service, and it's B2B, and they're really keen on it. They're ready to go, but the decision isn't really anything to do with the product. It's more to do with internal politics. It's more to do with, let's do something that looks like we're really busy and really kind of pushing the envelope, but then they pull out at the last minute. And I've seen that happen quite a few times with software packages and those kinds of things. Or, you know, people sign up to a 2-year contract and then month 1 they go, don't want to do it anymore. And I think that's the point, isn't it, with B2B, which is that risk brings in all those other external variables and influences. So whilst there is that also that group decision-making thing, again, that in a way makes it sound really rational, as though you have to kind of speak to those people individually and use things like ABM to message them. And when it's actually a bit more like, well, what are the motivations of the people making those decisions, you know, and who is the breadwinner, who's the one who really controls the purse strings? Is it actually the finance guy, or is it the very boisterous CEO who scares everyone else and has his own ideas as to how things are done? So it's very complicated, which is why I think a tool like this can be really helpful, because you can kind of try to almost plot those internal politics within organizations on this as well, to see how they act as triggers.
Well, and the politics can be so odd. And I just wanted, you know, at one of my computer sales, the first one I did just as an isolated salesman, what I figured out is I walked in, and on the first presentation, they decided they wanted to buy from us. And there were a lot of reasons. Interesting. We were a local company to them. So, and here I am, I'm talking about $1 million computer. And the first presentation, they're like, yeah, we like these guys. And we spent 6 more months going through the hassles of responding to an RFP. And I was down at the university all the time covering, you know, other departments, making sure I was talking to get support and, you know, make it possible for that to pay out. But, you know, they don't always work that way. But that was one where I kind of came away going, that's what makes the time perspective on these, the time warping, really strange, is that sometimes you walk in and they decide and they go with it. Sometimes you walk in, they decide, and it'll be a year before they go with it. And sometimes you walk in and you won't really win them over for 9 months. And wow, it's complicated.
So Sam and James, two questions for you, and maybe we start with Sam. You mentioned that you use the funnel as a diagnosis tool, as a business diagnosis tool, not just a sales and marketing diagnostics tool, whatever the right word is. You also mentioned ABM, and I want to know how those impact. I mean, you know, with the diagnostics, you kind of, like you said, if it's a big thing, you notice it. If it's not a big thing, then you can zoom in on finer print. But then, does ABM change things in terms of how you manage the funnel?
So yeah, I mean, to be honest, my view on ABM is a bit like a lot of things on marketing, which is I feel it's another fad. It's just the same old crap, just with a different name on it. It's nothing new. It's kind of like, and it's just, to me, it's a sales tool that people are using. So I don't think ABM is this new amazing thing. Nothing in marketing really is. That's the boring reality of it. It's all just tools. They're all tools, you know. Someone gives me a spanner that's red and says this spanner's better because it's red. I'm going to go, well, it's still a spanner, you know. So I think ABM, like the concept of it, can have some good application, which is making sure that you're building those accounts of people and understanding those individual organizations, especially if you're a really small business with, let's say, a really, really small pool of potential clients. You know, geographically, you can't serve many, you don't have a very big team. I totally can understand the point of view there to say, kind of, you're doing an inverse funnel thing, which is really what ABM kind of, it's the funnel, but upside down, you know. So I feel like there is some use to that and in getting that understanding. But then again, going back to, you know, B2C and stuff like that, or even bigger B2B companies, I think, well, if you get too granular on anything, you run the risk of finding explanations just because you've looked so deep. You end up like, it's like an analogy I used a couple of days ago on Twitter, which is, you know, you wore red shoes a couple of times and you were lucky because you were wearing your red shoes, because you were lucky twice when you wore them. So you should always wear your red shoes, right? Because you've deduced from that that's how it is. And I think sometimes that's what happens if you get really, really, really granular with stuff. You can get a bit too, yeah.
James, what do you think?
What do I think? Just checking. ABM, I would use agent-based modeling.
Account-based marketing.
No, account-based marketing.
Account-based marketing.
Yeah, so my view of ABM is that when you know the account you're trying to crack, so you don't really need the lead generation part because you know who the account is, and then you say, okay, go.
Yeah, well, from that, I mean, I was very fortunate in my last job to take the Sandler sales system, which is a kind of sales training course, and kind of it teaches you how to read people and also use open language and a variety of different things, and it's very useful from a one-to-one perspective. And you're absolutely right. If you kind of the risk there, I suppose, and I've been in a new biz pitch once, and we had an internal advocate who was quite senior, and was the decision maker, or so we thought. And we put all our eggs in that basket. And 3 days before the pitch, they announced that they were leaving. And so we rocked up to the pitch, and obviously that decision maker who we had spent months and months working on wasn't there, and we had nothing. So I think there's an absolute risk in account-based kind of marketing in focusing too much on that specific outcome and becoming myopic. But yeah, I mean, that would be my view. On my other view, which is ABM, agent-based modeling, right. Which could potentially have a transformative effect on how we utilize these funnels for big clients. Essentially, they are worlds that live on a piece of software, computer, and you could literally create a world with a number of rules and then launch a new product into it and increase your advertising and do X, Y, and Z and model the real life world. And you'd essentially have precognition of what your product launch could do, potentially. Big problem being, I used one trying to stop the UK from smoking a few years ago, and can we guess what the biggest lever for getting people to stop smoking actually is in the UK?
I can think of a bunch of ugly answers. Go ahead. What is it?
Yeah, well, it is pregnancy. So the big insight.
Does that limit your ability to succeed with that one?
Well, just a bit. Ban contraception and essentially stop people smoking. I mean, that was ultimately what the agent-based model said. I mean, there were subsequent insights which weren't derived from that model, but were basically you're more likely to stay quit if you've quit 14 times. So the insight became, right, how do we get people to make a quit attempt in order to push them further along to the 14? But yeah, I do see that you see computer systems like Unity or Unreal that form the basis of the entertainment industry, and they create real worlds, and the processing power is there to develop artificial worlds in which marketing could potentially feed inputs and then see outputs at the end. I do think there is potential there through the vastness of computer processing capability.
Can I ask, James?
Yeah.
On that example you just gave, what's intriguing to me is that maybe there's a truth there we need to pay attention to, which is what happens in life is often far more than what we can control as marketers. That we're always, I mean, what was it? Who was it? Erwin Efron, who wrote this book about media that I really loved. And he was talking about how, look, it's motivated by being out of Cheerios. Let's just talk about it. When do you choose to purchase Cheerios? When you're out, and so all these big things we talk about, that pregnancy is gonna upend all kinds of broadly laid marketer plans.
Yeah, that's my light bulb analogy. So it's my light bulb analogy. That you don't buy it until you're out, and in fact you don't even feel the pain until you're out of half a dozen. Now we're getting close to the top of the hour, and we do have a habit of going over. But if anybody has any questions in the audience, please put it in the chat, or raise your hand somehow so we can unmute you. And in that vein, I will have a couple of others. So James, something that you mentioned with agent-based modeling, it starts to sound like AI. It starts to sound like analytics and how you can automate the process of the lead nurturing, and maybe pick the juicy ones that are presented to a sales rep that are based on the likelihood to buy according to 55 parameters rather than 3. And and I know all of this is coming, and I know that big and small firms are touting these. Any reaction to that from you guys?
Oh, wow. I mean, there are significant data protection concerns with that I think would probably mean that it would never, you'd never be able to use it at that level, the identifiable level. Certainly not in Europe, and I imagine you won't be able to in the US soon either. So whilst I think there is opportunity, I not at that level. I'm because of data privacy.
My views are kind of, well, one, that, but also I think there is a narrative within anything to do with digital or technology or AI that somehow it's smarter than humans are. And the reality is it's still humans that program these things at the end of the day. The machines are never going to be as smart as us, and they're only dealing with whatever we feed into them, which means they cannot take account for the complex variables of real life, the real world. You know, and a simple analogy could be, you just opened up your shop, you got your sales down perfect, you know what you're going to get day one, you've done all the analysis, but then there's a big accident on a road that's right outside the shop, so no one can get in. now the reality is that a piece of software is never going to be able to account for that kind of chaos, and that, I think, is the reality of what marketers have to deal with, and that's the humility of it as well. Which is saying we're not dealing with certainties, and we never will be able to deal with certainties, because if it was that easy, then why would you really need marketers anyway? Marketers are the ones who are supposed to come in and kind of understand complexity and chaos and try and navigate it. Because if it was as simple as, you know, A, B, or binary logic, then, you know, we'd already be there. That's my view of these things anyway.
Well, and it isn't that, in a sense, what we're talking about, that the danger in the funnel is that we try to make it linearly actionable and controllable. And we try to, you know, that when companies misuse the funnel idea or misuse the customer journey idea, it's to try to make it analytic. And yet sales is fundamentally not really that much of an analytic process. I mean, I don't know if you remember, Shaheen, but within one of the last computers I closed was that one that went into Korea. And we
I remember
business because when the young man came to the US to benchmark computers, he went to our two competitors where he was ignored. And when he came to ours last, we paid attention to him. So that even though the benchmark didn't work on our computer, we created a valid argument about that. He went away loving us because we paid attention to him, which he was out of the tech department. And so he went home, and then his boss likes us because we took care of his guy, and we ended up winning the deal. It's in Korea, so I don't know what else happened. We'll leave it there. But I was advised by my boss to stay out of Korea during the last few weeks. But nonetheless, we won, I think, you know, fundamentally because of the emotional fact we took care of him.
Well, in fact, as you mentioned, my friend Miha was saying on LinkedIn that really the last thing you want is to let a customer know that they're part of a funnel. Because that's not going to be received well. And I was saying, well, customer journey sounds a little bit better. We're all in our own respective journeys, so maybe that works. But I think certainly a different vocabulary has a bearing on how the customer feels.
Yeah, way too often we allow our marketing speak to leak into communication with customers. And I just find it horrible. I mean, I worked at DIY, US DIY tool of business a lot. I hate the term DIY. And I've always hated when you see it in ads where, what are you going to do with your DIY weekend? I'm like, oh, God, you know. I mean, it's kind of become an okay term now, but it's one of those mistakes. We should never have let it out of marketing. You know, we should have kept it in because it's, you know, I put your problems onto customers. But anyway.
But I think that's the thing. It's sell without selling, which is as applicable in sales as it is in marketing.
Yeah.
You never want to be sold to. No one wants to be sold to. Whether it's B2b, B2c, they don't want to feel as though they are being sold to. And that's a challenge for both sales and marketing. And that is back up, Doug, to your point around funnels and diagnostics, etc., etc. That depersonalizes it and takes people's focus away from the fact that it's an individual, it's a human being, that is who we're speaking to, treat them with respect. Like that there is a link there between those elements.
So one more item, and maybe Sam, you can comment on this first, and that's so-called solution selling. Now, solution has been on my bad word list for a long time, but one man's product is another man's solution, sort of a thing. But there nevertheless is a statement about coalition selling. So I do kind of like that as a statement that if you're not selling by yourself, but you have a half a dozen partners who are bringing their ingredients such that you create what the customer really wants, and maybe you work in advance or maybe it's post sales, and it adds another level of complexity. So comment on that. How does that impact the funnel, the diagnostics, the marketing mix, all of the above?
So yeah, I think you're going to have to clarify it a little more for me, because to be honest, when I see the word solution, I do tend to switch off myself. I'm just like, oh, go away. So yeah, if you can clarify that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I've been using coalition selling rather than solution selling to capture what I really want, which is that the customer isn't just buying your product. Now, this is highly manifested in a computer systems. When they buy your application and they need a computer to run it, and then they need storage systems to store the data, and they need suddenly they need like a half a dozen different products that come together to create the final what they really want. Now, various vendors do that in advance at home, and then they say that's our solution. And then if you want it, then it triggers half a dozen sales guys swooping on you to tell you about the different pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I think as much as I dislike HubSpot, I think HubSpot are very good at that. They're very good at having these little companies that aren't really HubSpot, but they kind of represent HubSpot, and they have names similar to HubSpot. And what they do is they sell HubSpot, but what they do is they do exactly that, which is they build that full package around the needs of that business. And I have seen that done a few times. And again, I wouldn't use HubSpot myself, but the process that people have used has been really good, which is this very one-to-one, very hand-holding exercise. So they're selling the product at the same time, but also they are, learning about the needs of that customer to try and obviously think longer term, which is it's not just about closing the sale, it is about the retention and keeping that customer with them for a long time. So I think anything like that is always going to complicate the funnel, and I think that's, again, it's what you use the funnel for, isn't it? Are you using the funnel to measure closes and sales, and then anything post that is kind of really, that's just retention stuff, we won't put that in the funnel? Or are you using it to try and build like a full A to Z metric system, like a measurement system, which is, again, that's where it can get complicated. And that's why
come up with some good use cases for the funnel. It's for, like you said, for measuring sales, it's for diagnostics, it's for alignment, and the diagnostics will help you figure out what the marketing mix should be or what the solutions should be. Those are really good use cases for it.
I keep thinking about your scenario you posed there, Shaheen, because out of the computer business, you and I, we worked with some of those. And first I had this salesman shiver at anything that's too complex, because the minute you have more moving parts as a salesman, it gets so hard to pull it through to completion. On the other hand, Sam's right. There's people that have cracked that code. And we've had, like in the ad tech business, all these white label. When I had my agency, I can't tell you how many white label offers I got. Hey, you guys can white label our service, which would have meant putting an Atomic Direct name on it, and putting our business cards and stuff like that. And I ended up staying away from them myself, because I always worked with clients with a full honesty of, you got to know exactly where I'm getting everything. And it paid out well for us. But I know that there's a bunch of people that make great money doing it. It may just be that it's something that doesn't work for me as well. But it kind of gives me, it's like a hard time even to grok it up against the funnel. You do kind of have to, I think, have somebody who's leading the way, because it's their, somebody needs to understand the funnel.
Right. I think a lot of this comes down to just, what is the customer buying? And can you help them get to their destination faster? James, you were going to say?
Well, I was just thinking it sounds very much like the agency model. I.e., you go into, for example, buy media, and then there's multiple different things that can be bolted on. In Doug's example, there's ad tech that is white labeled from X, Y, and Z, or there's econometrics, or there's multiple different creative services, etc., etc. I think a lot of clients and it comes down to selling, doesn't it? Again, i.e., they want to feel as though they're being forced into buying something, and if it is done for their benefit with them, collegiate, then I see no reason why not. And actually, the funnel isn't affected. But if it's unconnected and it feels like just being pushed, then people will resent that, and you'll cause problems for yourself at some point in the future. But again, I don't know whether the funnel in the conceptual manner is applicable there, or whether it is it is kind of post lead purchase. So
Right.
it's almost like, yeah.
Actually, let me ask Shaheen, do you think, and this is back to that, does the funnel really have a role? What I'm thinking of is there has to be a really significant reason for the solutions to come together, right? I mean, it's like if there's not a real significant reason to bundle it, all these different things, don't do it. You know, there's no reason to do it. But if there is a reason, it does kind of end up becoming part of the funnel, which is at some point you have to say, look, what you need is to get to this point. We'll pull everything together for you so you get from point A to point B. And then actually it cycles back to kind of,
So to me, a solution is just simply further down the supply chain, the value chain.
Mm-hmm.
And if that value chain is being managed by the customer, you have a shot at giving them the final thing that they want rather than the ingredient. So you basically tell them you don't have to be a general contractor.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Is it's like in value, it offloads their employees from having to do the work, and they may have a lot of reasons for wanting to offload that. I've had a lot of people say that, well, why don't clients do this or that themselves?
Right.
The answer is, well, either they don't have the expertise or they don't want to waste their time doing that because they've got 100,000 other things they're doing.
Right. So if you do it right, then they got better accountability because there's one person that's responsible for that solution. It's better integrated. It's all done in advance. If you don't do it right, they'll give it to you and they're going to have all the problems without control, without ability to really influence. And then that's the last time they're going to do it and say, okay, we tried that, didn't work.
And they'll spend more
Right. But, essentially is like, do you want to build a house or buy a house? And if you really are good at building a house, you're never going to buy one because it's never going to be what you like.
It's true. And it's useful to note that the number of people who build a house are tiny. I mean, even the ones that hire a contractor to say, okay, I want to spec this out. Now, in certain income ranges, it's bigger. But overall, in the housing market, we just don't know how to do it.
Okay, so we're coming up to our 1 hour mark. One question for James. And your hexagon by definition is hex. Now, what if my sales cycle has 10 stages in it, not 6? Now that becomes like a decagon. So can we turn that into polygon?
Well, there's no reason why not. I think someone in Italy has changed some of it. It started out as a pentagon. It was just in my experience, there were a fixed number of generalized decision points.
I did notice that you've termed them in such a way that they can capture a bunch of things under their umbrella. Yes.
Yes, I mean, I've kept it quite broad. Mathematically, there's a concept called the Markov Chain that underpins it. And at the moment, it's all theoretical. I am working with somebody on whether we can turn it practically as easy as possible. That's the thing. I like practical things. The share of search work that I've done is practical. Applications are practical. Like all the stuff I try to do is practical with a solid theoretical background. That's so.
Well,
yeah.
I will say, looking at it, I'd much rather have only 6 because as a model to help me think about the world, I can kind of grok 6. but you start getting to 8 or 10, and those are the things I get from companies all the time. Here's our 25-point scheme. Or who is it? Who is it? This guy that does the jobs to be done method that has a 65-point scheme. And I'm like, what, for figuring out if a product's come on. So I like 6. So
all right.
I think 6 is good too, because you can, how I've used it when I've squiggled it out is I've just clustered things around what's already there.
Right.
Because for me, again, it's a tool for me. I would never communicate that to a client unless they actually were interested. And again, that's where it comes back to that funnel thing, which is I probably use something like James's tool and then do it and then go, I'll keep that nerdy stuff to myself. But then in terms of actually presenting it to the client, I go, no, it's really easy. It's really easy. It's just these 3 stages, but I've rationalized it to myself.
My motivation was alignment with sales. And if your sales management has an 8-step sales process, then you want to map to that.
That's true.
And if you want to say, hey, you're bouncing off of these 8 with a pinball, then guess what? I'm just going to go with Octagon because, I don't want to come across like I'm trying to redefine their sales process. I remember in one of the jobs we had, the marketing qualified lead became a 0 revenue lead for sales. Because if he called it anything else, there was an implication that the sales guy should now have a forecast about it. And that would impact their sales quota, and that was a big no-no. So we say, no, this is 0 revenue lead. It may or may not pan out. It's probably not gonna, but here's a lead anyway. Right.
Well, like we said earlier, a lot of this is about risk management and stakeholder management.
Right. And of course, Sam, you mentioned the political issues, yes.
Yeah. A good example of that is I made a mistake a couple of weeks ago. I wrote a really detailed media investment plan and presented it to people who weren't marketers. Now, what happened as a result of that is my big thing that was really detailed was completely ignored. And then I saw the recommendations made by someone else, and it was 2 bullet points that said social media and PR. So I knew immediately that I'd failed in my communication there. And I thought, okay, this isn't all them. It's not just them being stupid. It's partly me miscommunicating that. And, which I think sometimes we can all be guilty of, especially when we're talking to people that aren't marketers. So it's the perpetual battle, isn't it?
It is, although that's what you got with social media PR is the knee-jerk reaction in the world these days.
Yeah.
Well, how are you going to promote it? Well, social media, everybody's on social media. My students, I'm always like, they are? How are they on social media? I remain disappointed. And one of the things social media has blown with this topic is we don't have a breakdown of what kinds of people use social media in what ways. So for example, if I'm wanting to get good content, good in-depth content to help people thoroughly understand a product to them, I don't know who does that on social media, because the answer is not everybody does. Not everybody can be reached there, but I don't know. Maybe you guys are seeing it. I have to confess, I have a fairly high level of frustration that social media has been allowed a free pass. It's great. Oh, okay, good.
Well, the whole digital thing, and we have to come back to that. Yeah. So, James, you get the last word on this topic, and then maybe we can have any kind of final comments before we wrap. So you go, James.
On that specific one around social media and a lot of these things it depends, isn't it? And again, it's back to that point around Sam managing stakeholders. In another situation, what he produced would have been absolutely fine and perfect. But if we're not reading and we're not using the tools at our disposal to understand human beings and remember that they're human beings, we're going to fail. I used to write a large economic digest on a quarterly basis for our company, and then I used to roadshow it with various different clients, and the feedback I typically got was that was really, really interesting, because you made it feel like it was a human being that was households going through this process, the effect of the economy on households, and therefore what their behavior was like. And again, that's what these tools are for. human beings, what are they doing? How are we understanding them? And then managing around them, because to Doug's original point around, you can't force these things. You're kind of working around people. It's improving the likelihood, which is what it always comes back to in marketing and sales.
Well, at least not making mistakes that would prevent it.
Yes.
Doug, any comment on that? Because I felt like you were about to say something before I jumped in.
No, go for it. No,
Yeah.
I was just laughing. I think it's right on. I mean, this is
Right.
So many parts of marketing where we're kind of negotiating with consumers, or and I'll stick with the term consumer, but I mean, I teach my class, I get to positioning, which I've seen way too many corporations come out with. We're positioning this onto you, and talk about the true communication style of positioning, which is, hey, this is negotiated between you and the customer. Because the question is, where are they going to retain you in their mind? And you don't get to define that.
Yes.
You can learn what they do naturally and you can enhance that, but you can't define it. And God, marketers forget this stuff all the time. And maybe that is the error in the implications of funnels and journey maps and things like that, is that they kind of give corporations a feeling of being in control where they aren't.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, also connected to what James was saying about humanizing it all. And so excellent. Thank you. It's just such a joy to see all of you in person, so to say, virtually as it is, and not just on Twitter.
Yeah, really.
Why don't you let everybody know how they can get more of you and how they can find you? And then we can wrap with that. Sam, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'm just at Samuel Brealey, same as my screen name here on Twitter. That's where I'm active. I'm not active anywhere else. So join me on Twitter. I'm always happy to have DMs and long conversations with people, and emails and stuff as well. It's always good to learn. So I encourage you to say hello.
Excellent. James?
So I'm at JCP Hankins on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. I think I'm at James Hankins on LinkedIn. And I blog at the EQ Planner. If you search it, it'll come up.
Right.
I encourage, that,
No, I've been there, and I encourage all of you to go check it out. EQ Planner. Doug?
Yeah, and I blog at douggarnett.com. It was a clever name we came up with after hours of searching. And then on Twitter, I did get more clever, and I'm at Atomic Adman. So you can find me on Twitter at Atomic Adman. And I'm much more active on Twitter than on my blog these days, because I'm putting most of my writing energy into bookish-like things, which is tremendous fun, but man, it's a hell of a lot of work. So.
Right. And I'm on Twitter at Shaheen Khan. So excellent. Thank you so much. Until next time, thank you all of you who made time to be here. And hope you liked it. If you have any thoughts or ideas, let us know. This is really the opportunity, in my mind, to go deep with experts who know what they're talking about, who can cut through the BS and get to the real points and have a meaningful, substantive discussion. So I'm really grateful to James and Sam, and as always to Doug, who has been a wonderful co-host. And thank you, Andrew, for the thumbs up. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Lovely. Thank you. Good to see you all in the flesh.
Cheers.
See you guys.
Cheers, Sam.
Bye-bye.